I have 3 previous videos that relate to the topic at hand. The first one was on whether the early conditions on Earth were right for life to develop by chemical evolution. That video's purpose was simply to introduce doubt on atheism. Had there been a good supply of oxygen at that time, then chemical evolution would have been impossible. Had the early oceans been so diluted that there was not even enough of the right amino acids available to provide for chemical evolution, is another point that was presented. That was the introduction of doubt that I presented, but that by itself I did not consider as evidence of God. If you're interested, here is the link. The next video I dealt with was the unlikelihood that amino acids come together in hundreds of chains, and yet they somehow took up resonance, and I spoke of the increasing doubt that would be on atheism. For how by random did these 200 or more chains of amino acids by random find their way into one cell stationed by random in the right place and randomly had the exact sequences that were needed to provide all the functions of the cell? That to me is a huge fairy tale, and yet I did not even consider that as the total evidence of God, even though I do consider it casts significant doubt on atheism. And here's a link for that video. Now, in my last video, I talked about the cell coming to life and how would it stay alive. And I think a lot of people would say to this point, well, that's just certain things that we don't know. And to a certain extent, I do agree. And I will leave a link for that video. But something I believe casts serious doubt, because to my knowledge, science has not been able to make a living cell from scratch. Maybe from living DNA or RNA, and they've been able to do different things. But to do it from scratch and for that particular cell to come alive, I don't believe that will ever happen. One thing I've noticed that those have commented on my video that I was surprised at is how many atheists say we simply don't know how life began. But here's what we do know, that the building blocks of life are amino acids. That is so important to this debate. Outside of life being seeded from outer space, or there being a God who put everything into place, the only other option is somehow these amino acids coming together in a way that produce the proper chemical reactions that in turn would produce life. Those are the only possibilities. With that said, I want you to consider that all the other videos that I have made was simply used to cast some major doubt concerning the origin of life coming from chemical evolution. But I want you to consider something. I came from New England, and when we would get a major snowstorm, it was easy to tell when someone walked in a fresh batch of snow. The evidence was clear, for there was a fresh set of footprints. Romans chapter 1 verse 20 says, "For ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature and attributes, that is, his eternal power and divinity, have been made intelligibly and clearly discerning in and through the things that have been made, his handiwork. So men are without excuse, altogether without any defense or justification." You know, when a room is torn apart in a particular way and a dog gives a certain look, that is an indication not of a natural storm, but a dog who left evidence of what happened. So here's why I believe cell reproduction is because of God and nothing else. Science knows too much to get away with fairy tale stories. All life at the base level consists of amino acids. Thus, life could not have happened without them. So there's no longer an excuse to use, well, science doesn't know everything yet. For amino acids are the building blocks of life itself. Those chains of amino acids is what forms proteins. And thus, except for the membrane and the fluid in the so-called first cell or cells, those chains would provide the basic function of the so-called first living cell. Yet when it comes to reproduction, we see the evidence of God. There is no natural, exact reproduction of life without some type of code or input for it to happen. Here are some thoughts. How would the first cell split without destroying itself if there was not a God to guide it? How would an unguided living cell prepare to split itself in half? Even if all the proper proteins were in the first cell, there's no amount of fairy tale chemical reaction magic that could reproduce all the essential proteins until there was a duplicate copy. How could the cells split? Why would a living cell split, and what would be the cause of that split without any direction? Sure, you can have a chemical reaction to split the cell, but how is that chemical reaction going to result so the cell itself would still be alive after that split? Since one chain can be between 100 to tens of thousands of amino acids, that would mean that not only there would have to be a code that would know the exact sequence of amino acids to copy over, how would it get all the right materials to make another cell without any guidance? How would the cell know the time in which it's now time to divide? Finally, here is the main point. Atheists over and over speak of things happening naturally. It is simply chemical evolution that brought forth life. In order for evolution to even be possible from the beginning, it would require reproduction. If there's no natural reproduction, then when life first appeared, as they believe, could not evolve without that reproduction. The fairy tale of atheism stops in its tracks on how the very possible first cell or cells reproduced. To those that say by chemical reaction, then this is my response and my evidence of God. Listen closely. There was no chemical reaction in any potential first living cell or cells that naturally could make a duplicate copy of over 200 chains without a code. Thus, since a code involves design, and design requires a mind, then the reproduction of any first living thing could only have happened because of a supreme being. There is no other way around it. There is no chemical reaction that can duplicate hundreds of chains of amino acids from scratch. Scientists may be able to form some type of cell from existing life or even from scratch, but not the reproduction from scratch. God knew the ingredients for life, and the cell shows his evidence, his handiwork. Thus, one can choose to accept or reject the fairy tale of atheism. One can also choose to accept the footprint that God has left for us. Reproduction is not the evidence of chemical evolution, but the fruitful and multiplication of life is the evidence of God.